Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Melissa, and I want to thank you for coming tonight. We are going to discuss some ABA techniques and strategies to help you guys as much as possible at home. So without further ado, I am going to start with a brief presentation. And after our presentation, then I will be answering questions. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to post them in our chat box. And at the end, I will review questions in the chat box, and I will also be answering live questions. So you don't have to put them in the chat box. If you stay till the end, I'll be more than happy to answer questions, as many questions as I can live as well. So without further ado, let's get started, shall we?
I remember when I got pregnant with my daughter, I felt so grateful and so blessed. My life up to that point had been pretty rocky. I'd had a lot of bumps and bruises along the way, and I finally thought that I was turning a corner and God was blessing me with this beautiful gift of a child. And I just, yes, finally something was going my way. And then when she was born, she was just absolutely perfect. I had all of these dreams and expectations for her. I thought of all the things I thought she was going to do. Good girl. Right after the first birthday, I started to notice her behavior change. She went from, saying that, but she was obsessed with Dora the Explorer, Mama, Dada. She was saying it all. Girl, say that. Hit all of her milestones up to that point. She walked at one. She was eating solid. She just, she looked really good. And then I just remember her felt almost overnight or very quickly where her demeanor just changed. She went from this super happy baby to crying, tantruming, frustrated all the time. And I remember saying to my mom one day during one of the discussions, like, where did my happy baby go? But I didn't think anything past it. I think I was kind of not ready to fathom that something could be off, even though maybe the telltale signs were there. She started to lose the words that she had gained. She wasn't saying mama anymore. She wasn't saying ma'am. She just seemed really disconnected from us. Instead of playing with her toys, she would take them, dump them all out of her toy box, and just start twisting them around in her hands aimlessly, with no intended purpose. Really kind of in denial about it. And then I remember one day we were in the middle of the store, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she just started screaming and yelling like somebody had slapped her. I don't even know what the problem was, and I was so mortified. I didn't even know what to do. I was so scared. I literally just left the half full cart in the store, picked her up, and just ran out of there. I never went to that store again. I just didn't even know what to think. And that was probably the first time it really kind of stung for me that maybe something is wrong. They diagnosed her. They didn't diagnose her right away. They said that she was too young for a diagnosis. I didn't even know what they meant when they said that. I was like, diagnosed with what? I just had no idea what they were talking about. And then they said, we'll come back in if you're not seeing progress. I said, okay, and a couple months later, I'm watching these speech therapists play with her on the floor. I'm not seeing any progress. It felt like she was getting a little worse. And then we went for our 2-year-old wellness visit, and the doctor said that she was fine if she wasn't using 20 words with intent. And that was probably just the knife to my heart at that point. I really couldn't deny that something was up with her anymore. So then I called the county back in, and she was diagnosed on the spectrum. And I remember that day, and it was worst days of my life. It was my darkest hour. I could easily say that as a mother, as a woman, as just a human being. It was probably one of the hardest times I had ever gone through. And so be with God. So thankful to be so wrecking this beautiful gift He had given me. And for a while there, I struggled. I struggled to figure out what this meant or what we were going to do or how this was going to define her. All those dreams I had for her future were just completely shattered, and I just had no idea what was going to happen next. And just able to just blank when I thought about the future. One night I was thinking, I'm going to die one day. I'm just going to care for her like a mother. And something about that thought just snapped me out of my depression and my anger and my fear and said, listen, we got to get to work here. I promised that when she was born, I was going to be the best mother I could be to her. And that promise hasn't changed. In fact, it should be more now than ever, not less. She needs me now more than ever. And I didn't know at the time what we were capable of, or what having those changes, that mindset shift for me was going to do. But I wanted to know that at the end of every night, I could look myself in the mirror with confidence and say, you do everything you could, Michelle, to give her the best possible life. And if the answer was yes, then that was a good day. And I wanted the answer to be yes, 100%. And no matter where the cards fell, I know I could leave this earth saying I gave her everything I had, no regrets. And as I navigated this world with her and walked away that day after having that thought, I really just grabbed the bull by the horns. I became her assistant advocate. I'm not a special education master's degree teacher. I never had any formal training in ABA, but I knew that I was going to learn whatever I needed to learn to be really strong for her. And Juliana lost all of her language. Cheerios? Okay, she was not verbal when she was diagnosed. We taught her sign language. Show me. Juliana, show me. Then she went from sign language to word box nations. Then she started to speak. She went from the most restrictive preschool environment. She was in a 614, most restrictive preschool, special education preschool environment. Now where she is 8 years old, she's in a second grade class in a gen ed school, integrated class with typical needs. She speaks beautifully now. What do you like about Detroit? I like when we make coffee, and I like when they know. She has a personality, conversation skills. There's still things that we need to work on, but for the most part, her future went from black to now having possibilities. And none of that could have happened had I not kind of come out of my own way and really hit the ground running and started to take action for her. And I can't say that I can do that for every parent I coach. What I can tell them is I will have them feeling like I did, looking myself in the mirror, and saying, I was everything I could be for her today. I have no regrets. And whatever happens, is really for us as parents to know we fulfilled the duty that we promised when we had these children, to be the best versions of ourselves, to live, to raise these children. I've helped now hundreds of mothers, coach them one-on-one to do the same things I did, to help them to be strong, to help them to craft plans where we're seeing constant progress. This is what I want to do. I want to give you the chance that Juliana's had. I want to give you every opportunity to give your child that happens.
Dear Juliana, today was a day full of happiness. Thank you.
love that video. So let's talk about why you guys are here. So everyone has their own reasons for being here, but I'm sure that some of them include you want to hear your child speak and say, I love you, mommy and daddy. You want your child to master potty training and be free of pull-ups forever. You want to go to parties or family functions, knowing your child will play with other children. You want to feel confident that you're doing everything you can to maximize the future for your child. You want to feel certain about what their future will look like. You want to feel peace at night, knowing your child can take care of themselves when you pass on. You won't be here forever. And like Michelle said in that video, who's going to look out for my child like I would? You want to take care of your needs and others, knowing your child is making incredible progress. So let's talk a little bit about ABA, otherwise known as Applied Behavior Analysis. So it's applied because we address socially significant behavior. All that means is behavior that will affect your child on a day-to-day basis. Like I can remember back in high school thinking, why am I learning algebra? I'm never going to use this in my life, right? Unless I become an algebra teacher or an architect, I'm not really going to need this. And my teacher would say, well, it helps to teach you how to think and how to reason, and it's good foundation knowledge. We're not working on those things. We're working on applied skills, things that your child is going to need to use today, tomorrow, and the next day. So socially significant behavior, stuff that matters, following directions, speaking, potty training, things that will be helpful today, tomorrow, and throughout their future. Behavior. We address behavior, and all we mean by that are things that are observable and an event that we can measure. So speaking is behavior, following directions is behavior, attending is behavior, eating dinner is behavior, sleeping in your own bed at night is a behavior. So is this something we can observe and something we can count? If so, it's something we can change. And analysis. We constantly inspect and monitor data that we take that tells us if what we're doing is really working or not. We don't want to rely on our own subjective judgment, which could be influenced by whether or not I'm having a good day, could determine whether or not I think your child is having a good day. So we write everything down. So I gave a direction and he followed it. I asked her to come here and she came here. I called his name and he looked at me. I held up this picture and she did not label the right picture. So we count and we write it down. Then we analyze that data over time to see if the way I'm teaching makes that data go in the direction we want. So for skills that we're teaching, like directions and picture ID and speaking, they go up, they happen more frequently because of the way we were teaching and the reinforcement we were providing. And maladaptive behaviors like tantruming or engaging in repetitive behavior that interferes in their day-to-day functioning, those things go down over time as a result of teaching more appropriate skills to take their place and reinforcing the use of the appropriate skills. So that's where we get applied behavior analysis from. It's socially significant, it's observable and measurable, and we constantly analyze if what we're doing is working. And if it is, we keep doing it. And if it's not, we change what we're doing. We figure out why it didn't work and we change it. So let's talk a little bit more about applied behavior analysis. It looks at the science of the behavior. Human behavior is functional. It happens for a reason, and every behavior serves a purpose. Sometimes it takes a little investigation to figure out what that purpose is, but every behavior serves a purpose. Human behavior is predictable. There are triggers, otherwise known as antecedents. Those are the things that happen right before the behavior happens. They're the triggers to the behavior, the cue to the behavior. So I said, please turn off the computer, and he had a meltdown. I handed her a worksheet and she completed it. I said, come here, and he came here. Right, saying come here, handing the worksheet, those are the triggers, the antecedents, they cue the behavior. Behaviors are learned based on consequences. So consequences that are favorable, that immediately follow behavior, makes it more likely that that behavior is going to occur again at some point in the future. Consequences that follow behavior that are not favorable tend to happen less frequently in the future. So behaviors are learned based on consequences. When a child is first learning to speak and they're first making random sounds, depending on what language you speak, there are going to be some sounds that you're going to attend to more than others. So let's talk about English that I'm speaking right now. If there's a child, a nonverbal child who's babbling, and they happen to say ma or ma, and I'm the child's mother, I'm going to provide a lot of attention and reinforcement for that because that's meaningful to me. And I'm more likely to hear that sound again because it caught my attention. So that was a cue for me to give attention, right? And then giving that attention makes it more likely that the child will say that same sound again in the future. All of those other random sounds that really didn't mean anything, I didn't pay as much attention to, and they stopped happening, right? So that's how language develops over time. You pay more and more attention to the functional sounds, and they happen more frequently. We give less and less attention to the non-functional sounds, and they tend to go away. It's the same thing with other behaviors as well. Right? So if I come into work every morning and I see my coworker and I greet them with a friendly smile and a hello, and they say hello back to me, the next day when I see them, I'm more likely to greet them and say hello again. But if every time I come in, I say hello to my coworker and they ignore me and they don't respond, it's not going to take too many days before I stop greeting that person when I come in. So my behavior is learned based on the consequences. If it's met with a friendly response, I'm going to continue doing it. If it's ignored or met with no response, I'm going to stop doing it. Human behavior is therefore changeable. If we know that there are certain triggers that cue behavior, and we know that there are consequences that either increase or decrease behavior, we can now manipulate those things in order to change behavior. So if we know that every time my child hears the word no, they're likely to have a meltdown, okay? I can change the word temporarily. So instead of saying no, I can just not respond. I can say later, I can say maybe, I can redirect to something else, right? So I could change the trigger and provide a consequence for tolerating that. Instead of saying no, I say later, and then I give them a lot of attention for not having a meltdown, and then I give them access to what they wanted later so that they know I said what I meant and I meant what I said. That's working. If that happens every time, that behavior will change over time. Understanding those antecedents, those consequences, the functions can make problem behaviors irrelevant, inefficient, and ineffective. So if I know that my child is tantruming because they want to get my attention, right? Or they're doing a behavior so they know that they're not supposed to throw the remote, and they wait until I look at them and then throw the remote, it's pretty obvious that they're doing that for my reaction. So if I now know this, I can manipulate my reaction. I cannot react to that. And I'm going to know that because behavior is predictable, first the behavior is going to get a little worse, almost as if to say, oh, you think you can ignore that? Try and ignore this, right? But once they see that they're not getting the attention for the inappropriate behavior, and I teach them a better way to get the attention, that maladaptive behavior is going to go away. We just have to hit both sides of it. We have to teach an appropriate way to get what they were looking for, because they're not going to not want attention. They're not going to not want to get out of doing things they don't want to do. We just want to teach them how to do that appropriately. There are times I don't want to do things either, but I don't throw myself on the ground and kick and scream because of it. I just say, no, thank you, or I'm not going to do that. So we want to teach them an appropriate way. If I want attention, I don't have to start screaming at the top of my lungs for everybody to look at me. I can go over and call somebody's name or tap them on the shoulder or send them a text or an email. So I can change behavior because I know what the function is, and I can give an appropriate way to get that same payoff. And as long as they're still getting that payoff through appropriate behavior, and that inappropriate behavior no longer works, behavior is changeable. We're going to talk more about your specific needs in terms of those during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. So why ABA? Why is ABA the most effective therapy for kids with autism? Well, it utilizes reinforcement. It utilizes contingent reinforcement and differential reinforcement. So as I was just saying, if you give a positive consequence, so any behavior that happens, whatever immediately follows that behavior has the potential to either make that behavior more or less likely to happen, right? So I want to give positive consequences for the behaviors I want to see again. I want to give neutral or no consequence for behaviors I don't want to see again. The first step is to ignore them, okay? So contingent reinforcement is an if-then contingency. It just means if this happens, then and only then this follows, okay? So if you use your words, then and only then do you get what you want. That's contingent reinforcement. If I call your name and you make eye contact with me, then you can ask me for what you want, or I can give you a token, or I can give you my attention, or I can give you an item or activity that you want. So that's contingent, but if you don't, I'm not going to give it. That's the important piece of being contingent. If the child meets the requirement, they get whatever it is they're looking for. If they don't get it. So if I say, you have to finish your homework and then you can go on the iPad, and the child does not do their homework, they do not get the iPad. Or if I say, you have to do 3 math problems and then you get access to the iPad, and they do 3 math problems, they're all wrong. Now, I didn't specify that. Did they or did they not meet that contingency? They just wrote down anything, but they did the 3 problems. They're all wrong. So you have to be clear in what you're reinforcing. So what is the contingency you want to put in place? That you just finish 3 problems, or that you finish them correctly and then you get your iPad, right? And if you don't finish them and you don't finish them correctly, you don't get access to the iPad. If you do, then you get access. It also makes it predictable, so your child knows exactly what's expected of them and what is going to happen as a result. Now, differential reinforcement just means that the payoff has to be proportional to the effort it takes to do the behavior. So just think about that for a minute. It makes a lot of sense. If the payoff doesn't match how hard the behavior is, it's not going to work. So think about it this way. If I'm asking the child to do something that's easy, then they can get a reinforcer that's a mild or moderate reinforcer. But if I'm asking them to do something that's really hard, I have to have a much more powerful payoff, a much more powerful reinforcer, right? So as an example, if my boss says to me, you work Monday through Friday, but I really want you to come in and do some trainings on Saturday and Sunday. And if you do, I'll buy you lunch. That probably isn't going to be enough of a payoff to have me work 5 days and then 2 more days and then 5 more days before getting 2 days off, right? But if my boss says to me, if you work 2 days on the weekend, you could have 2 days off the following week, right? That might be worth it to me to do something extra, right? So bigger behavior, bigger payoff. Easier behavior, easier payoff. So if your child is already speaking in single words, you want to give them more reinforcement for using phrases. If your child is consistently using phrases, then they get a bigger payoff for using sentences. If your child is using phrases, they don't get as much of a payoff for using single words. If your child is using sentences, they don't get as much of a payoff for using phrases or single words. That's differential reinforcement. ABA utilizes systematic prompting and prompt fading. So what that means is we want to give the child as much help as they need in order to make the connection between that cue, that antecedent, that trigger, the behavior that they're doing, and that payoff, that consequence that they're getting. Right? So if we want them to make that connection, we want it to be very clear and very easy. So we don't want to give your child a lot of opportunities to try and like figure it out, make a lot of mistakes when they're first learning something new. We want to make it very clear. So when I say touch your nose, and then I immediately take your child's hand and touch it to their nose, and then I say, great job, that's touching your nose. I'm prompting. I'm actually physically hand over hand taking your child's hand and making it physically touch their own nose. That ensures that they don't make a mistake, so that over time of doing it over and over and over again, they make that connection between hearing the word touch nose, the phrase touch nose, and putting your hand on this piece of your face and getting praise or a snack or a point or a token or a reinforcer as a result. So if I prompt them, they don't have to figure it out. They don't have to go through, okay, well, it wasn't this, it wasn't this, it wasn't this, it wasn't this. Oh, wait, something in there got the response I'm looking for, and over time I'll figure it out. We don't want to do that. We want to use prompting so that your child makes that connection as easily as possible. But we don't want them to get reliant on it. So as soon as, if we are physically hand over hand taking the child and having them physically helping them to do the response, like touching their nose, as soon as you feel like you're not totally guiding your child's hand the entire way, like you feel the difference when you're helping them touch their nose when they have no idea where their nose is, and when they have a general idea and you're just guiding them. You can feel the difference. When you feel that difference, you start backing off your prompt. So instead of fully making their hand physically touch their nose, maybe I just guide it towards their face. Or maybe they start to move towards their face and I just help them localize it at the end. Okay, I'm fading my prompts so that the child is doing more and more of the response by themselves. They're still making that connection between the cue and the consequence, and they're learning to do more and more of it on their own. And because of differential reinforcement, the more they do by themselves, the bigger the reinforcer. The more I'm prompting them, the less reinforcer. That will help them become less prompt dependent. Again, if it's easier to do something with help, there should be a bigger payoff for doing it without help. ABA provides database decision making, which we talked about before. We write down all of the child's responses to our cues so that we know if those consequences are changing those behaviors for the better or for the worse. And ABA also breaks complex material into smaller, more teachable units for learners, like bite-sized chunks. So instead of saying, brush your teeth and expecting the child to do that entire chain of behaviors, we might first start teaching them just to pick up the toothbrush, then to pick up the toothbrush and to pick up the toothpaste, and then to pick up the toothbrush, pick up the toothpaste and open the cap. So we'll break it into teachable chunks. Or instead of having the child request with a full sentence, we start with one word, right? So it's a smaller achievable chunk. And once we see that that child is being successful using one word, then we can start prompting for the second word. And when we see that they're more comfortable using 2 words, then we start prompting for 3 words. So we make things easier. We organize instead of, it's as if you ever have to organize like a storage room, and you open the door and you're like, oh my God, there are about a million things in here that have to get done and I'm completely overwhelmed, and you just shut the door and walk away, right? Or you can say, okay, what do I have to do? I have to clean up all the garbage off the floor. I have to look through all the boxes and see what I'm keeping, what I'm giving away, and what I'm throwing away. I have to hang up any laundry. I have to, so I can make a list of tasks that I have to do. So I can create my own little like to-do list. All I did was take this overwhelming task and break it into bite-sized chunks that I just wrote down in a list. And every time I achieve something, I cross it off the list. And that overwhelming task gets smaller and easier to manage. And it gets done instead of being so overwhelmed that you just walk away. That's what ABA does for all learning skills for the kids that we're using that strategy with. This is why it's so versatile and so flexible, because we can break everything into small bite-sized chunks. We can customize the cues for your child and the consequences for what's motivating to them. We customize the prompts and how we fade them. So everything is individualized for your specific child's needs and your family's needs. So let's talk about ABA and some successful interventions. The first reason why our interventions are successful, or how we get to successful interventions, how we develop successful interventions, is first, we determine why the behavior is happening. We don't have a recipe book that says, if the child hits, do this. If the child bites, do this. If the child looks at you, do this. If the child says this, do this. But we do have a recipe book that says, if the child's doing this to escape or avoid something, do this. If the child's doing this behavior in order to gain attention, do this. If your child's doing this in order to gain access to an object or activity that they want, do this. And if they're doing it just because it feels good, tastes good, smells good, it's self-stimulatory in some way, we know what to do for that as well. So once we know why the behavior is happening, we know what to do about it. We teach and reward appropriate behavior. So we're not just telling a child what not to do, which happens a lot, right? Because when a child is doing the right thing, they kind of fade to the background, they blend into the woodwork a little bit, they stand out when they're not doing the right thing, when they're being disruptive or they're acting out in some way, right? They stand out, and then you have to correct that behavior. We don't do that. We try to reward appropriate behavior. We want to teach the child not what not to do, which leaves a lot open to the interpretation, but rather what to do instead, right? So if I say to a child, if you do not hit me, you will get a Hershey's kiss. And then they come over and they kick me, technically speaking, they get that kiss because I just said, if you don't hit me, right? If they bite me, they get the kiss. Not technically speaking, yes, right? So we have to teach the child what to do instead. So you need to use your words. You need to ask for a break. You need to ask for help. You need to keep your hands in your pockets. We want to teach the child what they should be doing instead, because if we leave it up to them, if we just tell them what not to do, and we leave it up to the child to figure it out on their own, they're not going to be successful. If they were, you wouldn't be here, right? They would have just figured it out on their own already. So we reward appropriate behavior so that the child knows what it is we're looking for. Don't assume that your child knows what it is you want them to do. We have to reward those behaviors and then make it more likely that the child is going to do it again. Many times parents want their child to learn or to do things for that intrinsic motivation, just for the sake of doing it. Or they should listen to me because I'm their parent and they should respect me. Or they should learn because it's going to better them in their life, right? But it takes a while to figure that out. And when you're constantly failing at something, you're not really looking at the benefits of kind of sticking with it, especially when everything in your life is hard or confusing in some way, right? So this is one of the reasons why rewarding appropriate behavior, teaching the child what to do instead, makes ABA so successful, and this is how you develop a successful intervention. You figure out what you want the child not to do, and then you figure out what you want them to do instead, and then you give them that positive consequence that makes it more likely they'll do that instead behavior again. We want to reduce the inappropriate behavior. So once we know why the inappropriate behavior is happening, we stop it. We cut off that supply right there. Like we turn off that switch, we cut that circuit, it no longer works. So if you're doing this to get my attention, I'm now going to ignore you when you do this. If you're doing this to get out of a task, I'm not going to remove that demand. Whenever you're done with whatever it is you're doing, you still have to come and finish this in order to gain access to whatever it is you want next, right? So we want to reduce inappropriate behavior, again, by rewarding things that can't happen at the same time as those behaviors we want to get rid of. So this guy here, Ivar Lovaas, he's the guy who figured out that taking this science of behavior that hadn't been used really to educate children before. He figured out that you can use this science to teach individuals that otherwise had not been successful in learning environments. So people on the spectrum, people with severe developmental disabilities, they had not been successful in the past. And Ivar Lovaas was able to show that using applied behavior analysis, using the principles of behavior to teach meaningful behaviors that we can count and observe, and using consequences to change those behaviors could help these kids learn. And sure enough, it was successful. So he was like the father of ABA and getting hours approved for people at home, right? So at this time, this is why we were able to get all of these early intervention hours, because of all the work and all the studies that Ivar Lovaas did to show that this method was really successful. So, and if you start as early as possible and you give intensive intervention that you really can remediate a lot of these behaviors that other, and teach these kids a lot of things that otherwise wasn't thought possible before. So it made it less likely that those kids would need services later in life. So the more intense and the earlier you start, the less likely it is that your child will require assistance throughout their entire life. That's the whole point of early intervention. So he did this study out of UCLA. He took, like I said, children diagnosed on the spectrum with severe autism symptoms. He exposed them to intensive hours of ABA therapy, like 40 hours a week. And after 2 years, almost half of those children were indistinguishable. They had indistinguishable signs of autism with 40 hours of ABA a week. Now, that's not to say they are recovered. That is not to say that they are no longer, it's not to say that they haven't recovered, but it's not to say that they no longer have autism. Autism is neurological. So until they fix those neurons, those neural pathways, you still have autism. However, you could be taught to compensate at such an automatic rate and at such an automatic level that it doesn't even look like you're compensating. It's second nature at this point. So it's no longer compensating. It just becomes part of your repertoire. Okay, and that's what happens here. So if you utilize these strategies, you really can see a difference. Like Michelle was saying, looking at the beginning of her video, all of the difficulties Juliana was having, all of the behavior she was having. She was crying, she couldn't express her needs, she didn't want to put on clothes and get dressed. Michelle didn't know what she wanted or how to make her feel better, which is, I'm sure, a feeling that all of you guys can relate to, right? So utilizing these strategies can make it so that your child can go from having behaviors like that, like Juliana was having at the beginning of that video, and then look towards the end of that video where she's reading her birthday card and she's speaking about having her face painted like the troll, like Poppy, and she has great conversations and she's very, very social and socially motivated. And had they not utilized this science and utilized these strategies and these interventions, Juliana probably would not be in a general ed second grade class. So in a gen ed school, with some support. So this is what our goal is. And this is how you get there, is by utilizing ABA and utilizing a service. The services that we provide here, not only do we, I'm going to get into that more too, but not only do we provide the ABA, but we provide the coaching and the support for you guys, because we know that this is more than just implementing strategies, right? If this was just about implementing strategies, we can give you videos of strategies and just kind of leave you at your own, right? But it's not about that. It's about changing the way you think about how you can change your child's behavior, what you can do for your child, and how you can do it, and to give you the support to do it along the way. I know how hard this is. I've been doing this for 30 years in other people's homes, and I have a nephew that I've seen it from the other side of the table. And he just graduated from high school this year. He was the lead in his school musical, Little Shop of Horrors, Eat Your Heart Out, Rick Moranis. He was a great Seymour. He is going to Suffolk in the fall. I've been giving him driving lessons. Now, this is a boy that resembled that initial video of Juliana. Like, when he was little, that video could have been taken at his house. He was screaming, crying. He didn't speak until he was older than 4. He was a lot of sensory issues, almost always in distress, didn't follow directions. And over time of utilizing these strategies, his whole world opened up. And he is one of my favorite people in the entire world. So let's talk about some of these services. Now, this can be expensive. Not only is it emotionally exhausting and emotionally draining, but it's financially draining. Autism Speaks reports that the cost of caring for a person on the spectrum over the course of their lifetime can run an estimated $1.4 million. Yes, $1.4 million. And that's just today. 5 years from now, it'll be more than that. 10 years from now, it'll be exponentially more than that. And here's how we broke that down. So look at communication devices, iPads, software, an AAC device, diapers, ABA therapy, speech therapy, OT, PT, feeding therapy, therapy for you, family therapy, sibling groups, social skills groups, adaptive equipment, specialized stuff in your house. If you have an eloper, alarms in your homes and on your child, and GPS trackers and things like that. So it could be even more than what's on this list right now. And this is about $100,900, so almost $101,000 a year, which is $8,400 a month. And like I said, that's not even including all the other stuff that I just mentioned. So with our masterclass, what you get is 3 months of a group coaching program with guaranteed results. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. But first, what you get in those 3 months, you get foundational skills for an independent life for your child. This includes personalized potty training plan for your child. Your child gains communication and you gain the tools to help your child gain that communication and maintain it over time. Eliminate tantruming and or problem behaviors. You can interact together as a family as if your child does not have a disability. You can stop eloping from happening, which is such a significantly dangerous behavior. We're going to be doing our next workshop on elopement. So if that's something that affects your family, please come back for our next workshop on elopement. Get your child eating new foods, a variety of different, where did the rest of my slides go? So you get the mindset coaching. You get the life skills coach, Michelle. You get access to the group meetings where BCBAs like myself do presentations like this on a regular basis. And what we mean by guaranteed results is that if it takes you longer than 3 months to achieve your goals and you're participating, you're showing up, you stay until you do. So it's really it can be a life-changing experience. So that being said, I am going to first, before I open it up for live Q&A, I want to take a look at our chat. Let's see. Can't hear, unclear, muffle. I have to go. Can this recording be emailed? Yes, it can. You can the replay will be emailed to you, so you can see the replay of this video. What do you have for teens? All of these strategies work for teens as well, and there are some workshops that I do that do address, especially in those group meetings. The group meetings we do every on Thursdays. So, and we have 3 different BCBAs that do presentations. So it gives us an opportunity to address things that come up at questions and workshops, or posts when people post questions on our Facebook group. We'll develop presentations to address those things. So when I see a few parents coming and saying, like, I have an older child and I have these particular difficulties, then I'll do some workshops or some presentations on that. I happen to be working a lot with teens and young adults the last several years. I started out working with really little guys, and then I started working with more like K through 3, and then more towards middle school. And now my specialty seems to be becoming more adolescent and young adult. Is intervention for a child above 3 as effective as intervention for a child at 18 or 24 months of age? Yes. The earlier you start, the better, just like with anything else. The sooner you break bad habits and start adaptive habits, the better, right? The longer you practice bad habits, both you and your child practice bad habits, the harder it is to break them. So the earlier you get started, the better. The earlier you get started, the more likely you are to see results more quickly. But I've started working with students at 8, at 9, at 12, at 16, at 18, in their 20s. So it's not that we cannot still remediate behavior at older ages. But again, like I said, the earlier you get started, the easier it is for everybody, and the more quickly you are likely to see results. So let me look at the posted Q&As. If you go into our chat box, there is a link where you can book consults so that you can sign up for our coaching program and see, you can speak to one of our representatives and see if this is something that will work for you and your family. So let's see, I asked last time if heavy metal toxicity affects speech as it causes inflammation. Some experts say ASD is biological and heavy metals is a biological health issue. Other experts say it's a right side brain underdevelopment. They recommend brain balancing. Can you address these issues? So Lee LaSalle, 2014. And yes, you will also get the recorded email. So there are a lot of ways. So let me back up a second. As I mentioned before, autism is a central nervous system dysfunction. It's neurological. So that means that the central nervous system has been damaged in some way that has expressed itself in what we call autism spectrum disorder. There are a lot of things that can damage your central nervous system. Heavy metal toxicity, I'm sure, has affected the nervous system of some children. Biological health issues, such as maternal rubella or other environmental factors or illnesses or viruses, I'm sure has also affected the central nervous system of some children. Genetic predisposition has also affected the neurological system of some kids. So spontaneous mutation and just roll of the dice has also resulted in central nervous system dysfunction as well. So there's a lot of things. So now, and they're learning more and more every day, right? So I've been reading a lot on if you took a lot of Tylenol while pregnant, now they're finding that that could have had an impact or made it more likely that kids on developed autism spectrum disorder. So there's a lot of things that can damage the nervous system. If it is damaged in such a way that your child is having difficulty learning, ABA can help. regardless of when you start, but the earlier you start, the better. And if you only have the child part-time, will this work? Yes, it absolutely will. I was actually just having this conversation with a colleague not too long ago, just a couple of days ago. They're working with the child, divorced parents, and one parent is really on board and all in on ABA, and the other parent is not. And the therapist was really concerned if everything we were doing was going to be effective. And my answer was, yeah, what will happen is the child will learn these are the rules at mom's and these are the rules at dad's. And if there are rules at mom's, they'll follow the rules at mom's. And if there are no rules at dad's, they won't follow the rules there, and vice versa. Now, can being exposed to a couple of days of inconsistency affect behavior in the other environment? Absolutely. I've worked with kids that when they've gone to their non-custodial parent for a weekend visit, it might take a day or two of bounce back to kind of get back into the flow of the program, because they just had a couple of days where the rules didn't apply. Now they're coming back into a situation where the rules do apply. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the fact that the rules don't apply. The rules might just be different rules, and that can be confusing. But over time, the child will learn there are two sets of rules and what they are. It's always better with consistency. If everybody is doing the same thing the same way, again, you're going to see quicker learning, and the child's going to be able to make those connections more quickly. But just because there's inconsistency doesn't mean that the child can't learn. It just means that it might take a little bit longer. It might be a little bit more frustrating for you. It might be a little bit of bounce back. But when we know that, we put systems in place to address those issues. So for those kids that I knew would have a transition issue coming back from the non-custodial parent's house, we would have a plan in place for that. And sometimes it's not even the fact that there's different rules. It's just the transition in and of itself. It wouldn't have mattered if the whole family was together and they happened to go away for a weekend and then come back to the house. That child probably would have had transition issues and a couple of days of bounce back from that as well. So sometimes it's just the change in the environment and the transitions in and of itself. And sometimes it's the differences in contingencies and being on board with this stuff. But yes, it will still work. Let me just click over here to our see if there's any other Q&A. Okay, so I am now going to take a look at our participants and see if you guys have a question. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question that you would like me to answer live. I am available and would be happy to answer your question. Just let me know and I will be more than happy. Just raise your hand and let's see, while I'm waiting to see some hands raised, I'm just going to answer this Kimberly Bryant's question right here. What are your recommendations for cohesiveness between the teacher, RBT, OT speech, and the family? As I said, the more consistency, the better. If everybody is doing the same thing in the same way, the child will more likely learn more quickly than if people are doing different things. A lot of times I have problems with contingencies with grandparents, like sweet grandma just wants the child to be happy, so she just wants to kind of give in, and she doesn't want the child to be frustrated or cry, so she's not going to kind of hold off with the item until they point to it or they say. She just wants to give it to them and just make them happy because she feels bad as life is hard, right? But as soon as I explain to that grandma, because I know her intention is good, as soon as I explain, doing that is confusing him, because it's like he thinks like, okay, I get it. I know what the rule is. I have to point with my finger to what I want. And if I point with my finger to what I want, or if I make this sound with my mouth, I'll get what I want. And then the rule doesn't apply. And the child might think, well, I thought I knew what the rule was, but I guess I don't, right? So once it's explained why the consistency is so important, more times than not, it's just about building the skills and getting them used to it. Like I said, old habits are harder to break. So I always go for more consistency, the better. I like people to collaborate so that everybody can be on the same page and everything can be as consistent as possible so that the children can learn as quickly and easily as possible. They don't have time to waste, right? If for every child without a disability, for every day that they're in school, they only have to learn 1 day's worth of education to keep up with everybody else. But if you have a delay, if you're ever going to catch up, for every day of learning, you have to learn like more than 1 day's worth. Otherwise, you'll never catch up from behind. So we actually kind of have to require more from kids that are having difficulty learning, right? So the more cohesive the program is, the easier it is. We don't have time to waste. So if we're confusing the child just because we're all on different pages, that's kind of not fair. But there are times where it's just impossible or very difficult to get everybody on the same page. So all we can do is the best we can do. The more consistent, the better. Okay, so Lizzie, I see that you have your hand raised, and if you would like to unmute your mic, I am at your disposal.
I just have a question. If my
Sure.
grandson is he's been doing ABA, by me doing your program, would that like interfere with what ABA is doing?
Oh, no, not at all. It will actually help. Again, that cohesiveness. What we do is ABA. So we would be giving you similar skills and helping to build those skills. So as an example, if you said, here's a behavior that my child is doing, and I gave you some suggestions on ways that you might be able to change that behavior, you would then talk to your team about those suggestions, and then they might say, oh, I like this second suggestion, I think would work the best, knowing your child the way I do, and then they can help you implement it on a day-to-day basis until you get used to doing it on your own. So it definitely just helps support. We would never want to contradict what an ABA team is doing at home. This is all like a big puzzle, and it's meant to all kind of click into place and fit together.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, I see. All right.
Do you have any other questions?
Because it seems like we were potty training, and it seems like now we have to start from the beginning with him.
Did something
I'm not
change or
that's what we don't know. We don't know. He was doing good before he went back to school.
okay, so there's a change. So sometimes, and that's very, very common. So a child can be on a really good roll and be learning a skill, and all of a sudden something in their environment, something in their life changes, and it just throws them off, right? Because a transition, change is hard. Change is hard for anybody. I am just a little tiny bit highly resistant to change. So I can understand how my students feel. Kids, especially when you don't know what's coming next, like change is scary and transition is hard, and now there is new demands and new people, and just being in a classroom sitting next to other kids is a demand in and of itself, because I have to keep my hands to myself and I have to pay attention, and I can't do exactly what I want at this moment. So all of a sudden things have just gotten harder or different. So it could just be an adjustment period. It could be that school is doing things a little bit differently than you did at home. So we just have to kind of get on the same page and adjust a little bit. Or it could just be, like I said, just the shock of going back to school after being home. It's just throwing them off a little bit. And you take a couple of steps back, go back to where he's successful. And if he's relearning it, it shouldn't take as long as when he learned it the first time, because it will become familiar again. And I would just talk to school, find out what they're doing during the day, how much liquid is he getting during the day. Maybe you were giving him a lot more fluids while he was home and he's only getting a couple of drinks a day at school. Find out how often they're taking him, what the process is, how does he indicate or do they indicate? So I would just get some more details from them and then see how that helps you re-implement that program at home.
Okay, because I guess our ABA supervisor talked to his teacher for last semester,
Mhm.
and apparently they're not supposed to touch the children. And so when he goes to school, he's like doing whatever he wants, like running around, jumping, getting in the quiet corner.
Mhm.
So we noticed since they're doing that, it's like we're wondering what is he learning? Because over there, it's like he's doing whatever he wants. So when he gets home, he's kind of doing the same thing here
Right, right,
when we're
because if I
trying
get to
to.
do what I want all day long when I'm there, why can't I do what I want all day when I'm home, right? So I'm king of the mountain there, why do I have to do what you want me to do here? So just because a program can't touch the children does not mean that they cannot address behavior. Touching a child is my last resort. Like, I'm only going to touch a child if I need to keep them or me safe, or somebody else in the immediate environment. Otherwise, I use all positive strategies, like and prompting is different, like showing a child like how to touch your nose and hand over hand teaching them to touch your nose is different than putting your hands on a child because they're running around the classroom all day. But you can now, if you know behavior, you can make what you want them to do more fun than running around the classroom. You can structure things differently. Like, it sounds to me that they might need a little training and assistance with some classroom management strategies. Does your grandson have an IEP?
Yes.
Okay, so if he has an IEP, then you can have your daughter or your son call a meeting and advocate that on the IEP that the staff that works with him gets training, that they get training and training and supervision in classroom management and or behavior management strategies. They can specify positive only strategies or positive behavior intervention supports. And that way, if on the IEP, it has to happen. It's a legal document. So if you put on the IEP that they have to get training, that would go under supplementary aids and services or staff supports, depending on the format that the IEP that they're using. You can have things like that indicated on the IEP, because like you said, how much is he learning if he's running around the classroom? And if they can't touch him, how well, and they don't know these other strategies, it's going to be a wasted year.
Yes, that's what I think. We already wasted a year, you know,
And we don't
and
have any more
that's
time to
what's.
waste. So,
Yes, we don't have any more time.
so part of what
So
we do in our program is we have a whole advocacy part of our program. It's called Advocate Like a Boss. And we teach you guys all of this kind of stuff in terms of what you're eligible for. Your child is going to get much more of a comprehensive program than if you don't. So part of what we do is help teach you guys.
and speech therapy, and we're trying to figure out what other things can we do to kind of curb that.
Okay, ABA is really important because that's going to address the behavior piece of it, right? So speech is going to help teach your child. Is he verbal?
Yes, ma'am, he
Okay.
is.
So speech therapy will help with like pragmatics and conversation skills and things like that. But ABA, behavior management, will help develop like a reinforcement system or a behavior plan that will teach you how to set up those rules, follow through with them, make it more likely that your child will follow the rules than not, and what to do when they don't. So ABA
Yes,
is
ma'am.
really important, and parent training. So you can get ABA in your home through health insurance, depending on what health insurance that you have, so that you can get therapists there like on a daily basis to help support plans that we put in place. That will come with a BCBA to be a supervisor who would supervise those hours live and in person. In addition to that, a program like what we offer that has the group component to it, again, gives that community with other parents that are also finding the same behaviors and utilizing similar strategies and giving each other ideas and really helping along the way with the parent training component. And when something doesn't work out, to give you a new strategy in its place, right?
We
So-
we
Go ahead.
live like away from the place that do the therapy. We live in Green Bay, Alabama. The closest therapy we have is in like Montgomery. It's like 35, 45 minutes away. So I was wondering, like you said, with the in-home therapy, there any way that you can kind of like for us doing it, like we could call and they could like come to us, or what we have to do? We have to go to them first, or what?
So usually so with a program like what we offer, it's all virtual and all online. So it's really helpful for people like that are in your position that don't have a lot of access to people like right in their, in their locale, or that's close to them. When you get ABA through your health insurance, it's provided in your home. So what you would have